Start the stream and cut the volume and go to here. And we're in 1980. And today it's The Martian Chronicles. Now, this is not a film. I usually do films. This is not a film. It's a three-part television miniseries where each part is about an hour and a half. So you've got 4.5 hours in total of this tosh. Now, based on the Ray Bradbury sci-fi novel of the same name. Now, Ray Bradbury was a very prolific science fiction writer. It was published in 1950. It's comprised of many of his short stories about Mars, all edited together or lashed together to make some kind of coherent and at least publishable book. Now, the miniseries uses many of these short stories as episodic and sometimes quite isolated parts with varying amounts of continuity. Now, the book, all the parts are actually quite distinct and discrete and not connected. Whereas to write the miniseries, they've actually done a fairly good job of stringing it together to glue some of the what would have been separate parts into as if it's one story. But it still shows that there are chunks to it that are not really parts of, not really connected to the others. But they've done a good job of connecting it together. The premise of the book, and therefore the miniseries, is that Mars has inhabitants. Earth was being threatened by political unrest leading to war. The Martian civilization comes to an end just as human civilization on Earth comes to an end also. But a small amount of Earth explorers and then later settlers come to Mars. Mars has a thin but breathable atmosphere, and in these stories and canals, water and vegetation exist. Now, the three parts of the miniseries are called 1, the expeditions, 2, the settlers, 3, the Martians. And the first part, the expeditions, begins with the Viking 1 probe landing in 1976, as it did. So you see this like a tiny little Airfix model of a probe, not very convincing, landing on what they say is Mars. But NASA is divided into those that consider that there may be life on Mars and those that completely discount the possibility. So we see the probe as the camera viewpoint expands wider, and we see a Martian city over the horizon. The Viking probe conclusively sends back no trace of life. But as the narrator notes, if it had landed just a little bit further on, things would have been completely different. And on Mars, a Martian woman has dreams of Earth people coming through telepathy, and she divines their thoughts and intentions. Her jealous husband kills the explorers when they arrive. The second mission is launched, and their crew, upon landing, recognise the place and the people, and they're warmly greeted by people who are from their own lives, including some who had long ago died. And this is a plot by the Martians to use their own memories telepathically to construct a false reality, and then they'll all be killed at night. The third mission, and these are many years apart, third mission, decade or so later, is led by Colonel Wilder, who's played by Rock Hudson, and this is one of his later parts. This is a 1980 miniseries, but it was broadcast in January 1980 for the first time. So really, it's a product of the late 70s. Rock Hudson was sort of at the end of his career by then, but he did a very, very good part in this. They discover, Colonel Wilder's mission discovers ancient Martian cities, and that all Martians, they discover that all Martians had died of a disease brought by the previous expeditions. The second part, so the second 1.5 hour chunk, called The Settlers, Wilder is back with a fleet of spaceships to colonise Mars. There's a prolonged and unexciting episode with 2 monks, one of whom, Father Stone, is played by Roddy McDowall, who was in the original Planet of the Apes. And there's lots of shallow, religious, fabricated angst that occurs, which really doesn't add much to the story. And at one point they meet Jesus, but it proves to be a Martian who appears to others to be who they are thinking of. So for each person, it's whoever they are thinking of. That's how he will appear, involuntarily. Meanwhile, on Earth, the budget for colonisation is cut. The colony is mostly evacuated, and one survivor of the third mission, Sam Parkhill, has opened a hamburger bar with his wife, anticipating much trade. Seems to be dressed in Wild West sort of. There's a lot of Wild Westness about this. The Martian comes in and hands him something, but Sam fears shoots the Martian. And after a brief chase in sand ships, other Martians hand him a land grant to half of Mars. So now he owns half of Mars. Bit weird. And later, as they view the Earth through a telescope or electronic periscope type of thing that they have, they see it consumed by nuclear annihilation. The Earth burns up as they see it, as they watch it. So no hungry customers are going to come. The third part, called The Martians, the Earth is now dead, Very few humans are alive on Mars. One man, Benjamin Driscoll, is the only one in his town. He hears a telephone ring, and then he starts going through the phone book. He gets this idea, go through the phone book of Mars, dialing every single number, and eventually a woman answers, and then he flies a considerable distance to meet her. It's Genevieve Seltzer, who's played by Bernadette Peters, who was in a lot of films in those days. She turns out to be completely self-obsessed and preoccupied with her looks. They go out on a date, but it's really hard work. And in the evening, it turns out she only wanted someone to repair her sauna and all her things, and also cook for her. So he cuts his losses and flies away, abandoning her and any prospect of companionship with such a high-maintenance narcissist. Peter Hathaway lives with his wife and daughter on Mars. Father Stone and Colonel Wilder visit them. During a toast, Hathaway dies of a heart attack as his wife and daughter look on smiling. And it turns out Hathaway made them as robots to replace his real wife and daughter when they died years before from an unknown virus. And then Ben Driscoll lands shortly after Stone and Wilder depart, and the robots seem pleased that Driscoll decides to stay with them. The Martian Chronicles was shot at Shepperton Studios and in Malta and also Lanzarote. It was mostly a British stroke American production. The stories are fairly interesting in their own standing, but this 1980 television miniseries, and as I say, it was broadcast in January, so it's really 79-ish that a lot of the work was done, does have a lot of kitsch and low-budget feel about it. And I think they really pushed their boundaries of how much they can do with how little they've got. Ray Bradbury himself described the miniseries as just boring, which I think is a case that can indeed be made. On one hand, it's quite laughable, even though it's not supposed to be, simply because of bad set design, predictable acting, and strangely claustrophobic way of shooting scenes. But on the other hand, it does have a totally amazing late 70s disco-themed title music and incidental music by Richard Harvey. And I mean really good disco, cheesy. I think the whole miniseries is worth it for that alone. So, The Martian Chronicles, 1980, 3-part television miniseries, 4.5 hours worth of complete tosh. But it's fun to watch. Have a very good weekend. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.